The chandeliers of Ashbury Hall didn't sparkle for everyone. For Evelyn Moore, they were harsh interrogators, spotlighting the one thing she wished to hide, her very existence. She stood by the velvet drapes, a ghost in a faded blue gown, watching the world spin in waltzes she was forbidden to join. They called her father a thief. They called her the beggar's daughter. She had accepted her fate as the outcast until the music stopped. The crowd parted, silencing their cruel whispers as the most powerful woman in England, the Dowager Duchess, walked straight toward her. She didn't offer pity. She offered a hand and issued a command that would shatter the aristocracy. "Dance with my son." The winter of 1894 was unforgiving, but the cold inside the ballroom of Ashbury Hall was far more biting than the snowdrifts piling up against the manor's stone walls. Evelyn Moore adjusted the lace on her gloves. They were mended, the stitching incredibly fine, meant to hide the fraying edges of the silk. It was a perfect metaphor for her life, a frantic, desperate attempt to hold together dignity that had unraveled 3 years ago. "Look at her," a voice drifted from behind a fan of ostrich feathers. It was Lady Genevieve, a woman whose beauty was matched only by the venom in her tone. "I don't know how she has the audacity to show her face. If my father had been caught embezzling the Crown's funds, I would have exiled myself to a convent in France." "Hush," her companion giggled, though not quietly enough. "She's only here because the Dowager Duchess has that peculiar charity clause in her invites. All neighbours of standing. Though I suppose standing is debatable for the Moors these days." Evelyn stared straight ahead, fixing her gaze on a massive wreath of holly and ivy hanging above the orchestra. She didn't flinch. She had learned the hard art of becoming stone. If she didn't move, if she didn't breathe too loudly, perhaps they would forget she was there. She wasn't supposed to be here. She knew that. But her younger brother, Thomas, was ill. Consumption, the doctor had whispered with a grim shake of his head. And the heating coal was gone. The buffet at the Ashbury Christmas ball was legendary. If she could just slip a few pastries, perhaps a wrapped cut of beef, into the pockets of her cloak in the cloakroom, Thomas would have a Christmas dinner. It was theft. It was pathetic. It was necessary. The orchestra swelled, the strings launching into a lively quadrille. The room became a kaleidoscope of silk, satin, and jewels. Men in stark black tailcoats swept women in emerald and crimson gowns across the polished floor. Evelyn remained by the draughty window, the chill seeping into her bones. She was 22, an age where she should have been on her 3rd or 4th season, perhaps holding a babe of her own. Instead, she was a pariah. Her father, Arthur Moore, had been a respected banker until the scandal. £50,000 missing from the railway trust. He had sworn his innocence until the day his heart gave out, leaving Evelyn and Thomas with nothing but a crumbling cottage and a surname that tasted like ash in the mouths of society. "Champagne, miss." Evelyn jumped. A footman held out a silver tray. He looked at her not with disdain, but with pity. That was almost worse. "No, thank you," she whispered. Across the room, the double doors opened. The air in the ballroom seemed to be sucked out, leaving a vacuum of awed silence. William Cavendish, the Duke of Ashbury, had arrived. He was taller than the portrait suggested, broad-shouldered and imposing in his evening wear. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was more striking than handsome, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from granite, and eyes that scanned the room with bored detachment. He was the most eligible bachelor in England, and the most elusive. He hated these balls. Everyone knew it. He stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the sea of hopeful debutantes, like a general surveying a battlefield he had no interest in fighting. "He looks ready to murder someone," a woman whispered near Evelyn. Evelyn watched him. She remembered William from years ago, before he was the Duke, when they were children playing in the woods that bordered their estates. He had been kind then. Quiet but kind. He wouldn't remember her. Not now. Not like this. As he descended the stairs, the crowd surged forward subtly, a tide of ambition trying to wash over him. Mothers pushed their daughters forward. Men puffed out their chests. Evelyn took a step back, retreating further into the shadows of the heavy velvet drapes. She just needed to wait for the dinner service. Just wait for the distraction. But as she stepped back, her heel caught on the hem of the drapes. She stumbled, her hand flailing out and knocking into a pedestal, holding a heavy porcelain vase filled with winter roses. The crash was deafening. Water and ceramic shards exploded across the floor. The roses lay like severed heads on the parquet. The music stopped. The chatter ceased. 300 pairs of eyes turned to the corner of the room. Evelyn froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was on her knees, wet from the vase water, her mended gloves soaked. "Oh, how clumsy," Lady Genevieve's voice rang out, clear and amused. "Perhaps she's drunk, like father, like daughter." Laughter rippled through the crowd. It wasn't loud, but it was a low, cruel hum. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. This was it. The final humiliation. She scrambled to gather the shards, cutting her finger on a piece of blue and white porcelain. A drop of bright red blood welled up, mixing with the spilled water. "Leave it!" A sharp, imperious voice cut through the laughter. The room went deadly silent again. Evelyn looked up. Walking through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea, was Lady Margaret, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbury. She was a woman of 60, dressed in formidable black lace, clutching an ebony cane topped with silver. Her face was severe, her eyes sharp as hawks. She stopped in front of Evelyn. Evelyn trembled. The Dowager was known for her ruthlessness. She would surely have Evelyn thrown out. "Get up, child," Margaret said. It wasn't a suggestion. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest. "Your Grace, I am so sorry. I will pay for it. Don't be foolish. You have no money," Margaret snapped, though her voice wasn't loud. It was factual. And that vase was hideous. My late husband bought it, and I've been trying to find a reason to destroy it for 20 years. A few nervous titters broke out in the hall, but Margaret silenced them with a glare. She reached out and took Evelyn's uninjured hand. Her grip was iron strong. She pulled Evelyn out of the shadows and into the center of the room, under the blaze of the chandelier. "You are Arthur Moore's daughter," Margaret stated. "Yes, Your Grace," Evelyn whispered, bracing for the insult. Margaret looked at her, searching her face. "You have his eyes. He was the only man in this county who could play chess without boring me to tears." Margaret turned her head, looking up toward the dais, where her son, the Duke, was watching the scene with narrowed eyes. "William!" Margaret's voice carried to the rafters. The Duke straightened. "Mother?" Margaret held Evelyn's hand high, displaying the girl in the faded dress to the entire nobility of England. "The music is wasting away," Margaret declared. "Come here, dance with my son." The command hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. "Your Grace, please," she hissed under her breath. "I cannot." "Look at me." "I am looking at you," Margaret replied, her voice low and surprisingly gentle for a woman of such terrifying reputation. "And I see the only person in this room who isn't wearing a mask of false adoration. Chin up, Miss Moore. Do not let them see you bleed. From the dais, William Cavendish descended the stairs. He moved with a predatory grace, his eyes locked on his mother, and then, slowly, shifting to Evelyn. He didn't look pleased. His jaw was set tight. The crowd held its breath. For the Duke to dance with the daughter of a disgraced embezzler, it was social suicide. It was a scandal in the making. William stopped in front of them. He towered over Evelyn. Up close, the scent of him, sandalwood and cold winter air, was overwhelming. He looked at his mother. "Mother, what are you doing?" "I am enlivening a dull evening," Margaret said, "and you are doing your duty as a host. Miss Moore has had a fright. You will steady her." William looked down at Evelyn. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a storm over the ocean. He took in her frayed dress, the wet hem, the way her hand trembled in his mother's grip. He could have refused. He could have laughed. He could have signalled for a servant to escort her out. Instead, he extended a gloved hand. "Miss Moore," he said, his voice deep and devoid of mockery. "May I?" Evelyn felt like she was in a dream, a fevered dream. She slowly reached out, placing her shaking hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, encompassing her small fingers completely. "Orchestra!" Margaret barked, tapping her cane. "A waltz!" The conductor, startled out of his stupor, frantically tapped his baton. The strains of the Blue Danube filled the hall. William pulled Evelyn into the frame of the dance. His hand settled on her waist, a touch that felt searing even through the layers of fabric. "Breathe," he murmured near her ear as he swept her into the first turn. "You look as though you're about to faint." "I might," Evelyn admitted, her voice barely audible. "Why are you doing this?" "Because my mother is a force of nature, and it is easier to obey the storm than to fight it," William said dryly. He navigated her expertly through the crowd. Other couples were joining the floor now, hesitant at first, but driven by the protocol that one must dance when the Duke dances. But they gave the couple a wide berth. Evelyn felt the eyes on her, hundreds of daggers pricking her skin. "They are staring," she whispered. "Let them," William said. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, is it true?" Evelyn stiffened in his arms. "Is what true, Your Grace?" "That you broke the vase on purpose?" Evelyn looked up, shocked. "What? No, why would I do that?" "To get my attention," William said calmly, spinning her past a group of whispering matrons. "It is a tactic I have seen before. Last season, Lady Sarah accidentally set her fan on fire near my coat." Indignation flared in Evelyn's chest, burning hotter than her embarrassment. She stopped trembling. She looked him square in the eye. "Your Grace, I assure you, my only goal tonight was to remain entirely invisible. I have no desire to be the subject of your attention or anyone else's. I am here for personal reasons, not to entrap a duke." William's eyebrows rose slightly. He seemed surprised by the sudden steel in her voice. "Personal reasons? The buffet?" she blurted out, then bit her lip. William missed a step, just a fraction, but she felt it. "The buffet? My brother is sick," she said, her pride crumbling under the weight of her reality. "I came to steal roast beef. There. Now you have a reason to throw me out that is far better than a broken vase." William stared at her. The rotation of the waltz slowed slightly in his perception. He looked at the woman in his arms, really looked at her. He saw the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the faint shadows of exhaustion under her eyes, the desperate set of her mouth. She wasn't flirting. She was starving. A strange sensation twisted in William's gut. Anger. Pity? He wasn't sure. "You are Arthur Moore's daughter," he said quietly. "I remember your father. He taught me how to fish in the creek between our lands." "He didn't steal that money," Evelyn said, the old refrain coming out automatically. "Everyone says he did," William countered, not cruelly, but probing. "Everyone is wrong," Evelyn said. "He was framed. He died trying to prove it." William didn't respond immediately. He spun her again, the music reaching a crescendo. "And who do you think framed him?" "I don't know," Evelyn whispered. "But the man who signed the audit that condemned him is here tonight." William's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Lord Harrington." William's grip on her hand tightened almost painfully. Lord Harrington was his intended father-in-law, or at least the man whose daughter, Lady Genevieve, William was expected to propose to by New Year's Eve. "That is a dangerous accusation, Miss Moore," William warned, his voice dropping to a chill. "Lord Harrington is a pillar of the community." "Pillars cast long shadows," Evelyn replied, her breath hitching as the music slowed to a halt. "And monsters like the dark." The song ended. William did not release her immediately. They stood in the center of the ballroom, chest to chest. "You are a strange woman, Evelyn Moore," he said softly. "I am a desperate one, Your Grace," she replied, pulling her hand away. "Thank you for the dance. It will be the talk of the county for years. I should go." She turned to flee, but she didn't get far. Lady Margaret was waiting at the edge of the floor. "Going so soon?" the Dowager asked, blocking Evelyn's path with her cane. "Nonsense. You haven't had dinner yet. And I believe you mentioned roast beef?" Evelyn froze. Had the old woman heard her confession to the Duke? "Come," Margaret said, hooking her arm through Evelyn's. "You will dine at the head table. With me." The head table at the Ashbury Ball was a fortress of privilege. Crystal goblets, gold-rimmed plates, and enough silverware to equip an army. Evelyn sat on the Dowager's right. On the Dowager's left sat Lord Harrington. Next to him, Lady Genevieve. And directly across from Evelyn sat the Duke. The tension was thick enough to cut with a fish knife. "So," Lord Harrington boomed, his voice oily and loud. He was a large man with a red face and a moustache that twitched when he ate. "I must say, Duchess, it is charitable of you to include Miss Moore. Very Christian." "It isn't charity, Harrington," Margaret said, slicing her pheasant with surgical precision. "It is correcting an oversight. Miss Moore is a neighbour." "A neighbour with a colourful history," Lady Genevieve sneered, sipping her wine. She glared at Evelyn. "Tell me, Miss Moore, how is that cottage? I hear the roof leaks terribly in the winter. Must be dreadful for your constitution." Evelyn gripped her fork. "It is home, Lady Genevieve. We manage." "We?" William asked from across the table. He hadn't touched his food. He was watching Evelyn again. "My brother and I," Evelyn said. "Ah, young Thomas," Lord Harrington said. "Sad business. I heard he is not long for this world. Perhaps it is for the best. The sins of the father, and all that." The sound of silverware clattering against china silenced the table. Evelyn had dropped her fork. Her hands were shaking, not with fear this time, but with a white-hot rage that blinded her to social etiquette. "My father," Evelyn said, her voice trembling, "was a good man, and my brother is innocent. If there is sin at this table, Lord Harrington, it does not sit with me." Harrington's face turned a darker shade of puce. "How dare you! You insolent little— Harrington!" The Duke's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. William leaned forward, his grey eyes icy. "You will not raise your voice at my guest," Harrington sputtered. "Your guest? William, this is the daughter of a criminal. She shouldn't even be in the servants' quarters, let alone your table. She is likely here to steal the silverware." "Actually," Lady Margaret interjected calmly, "she is here because I invited her. And regarding the embezzlement—" Margaret paused, taking a slow sip of wine. She looked over the rim of the glass at Harrington. "I have recently been going through the old bank archives. My late husband kept copies of everything, including the private ledgers of the Railway Trust." Harrington went still. The fork halfway to his mouth froze. "Did he?" Harrington choked out. I thought those were lost in the fire at the clerk's office." "Not all of them," Margaret smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had cornered a rabbit. "I found some very interesting discrepancies. Dates that didn't match. Signatures that looked traced." Evelyn looked between Margaret and Harrington. Her heart began to pound. Traced signatures. "That is ancient history," Harrington said quickly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Why bring it up now?" "Because," William said, his eyes locked on Harrington's nervous reaction, "justice has no expiration date." William stood up. The movement was abrupt. "Miss Moore," William said, "I find the air in here stifling. Would you accompany me to the library? I believe there is a book there your father once lent mine. I wish to return it." It was a blatant excuse. Everyone knew it. Leaving a dinner mid-course with a single woman was improper. "William," Lady Genevieve cried out, "we haven't had dessert." "Enjoy the tart, Genevieve," William said coldly. "It should match your disposition." He walked around the table and offered his hand to Evelyn. Evelyn took it. As they walked out of the banquet hall, leaving the stunned silence behind them, she realized something. She wasn't just dancing with the Duke anymore. She was entering a war. And for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't fighting alone. The library of Ashbury Hall was a sanctuary of silence, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the ballroom. It was a cavernous room, smelling of leather bindings, beeswax, and the faint, acrid scent of a dying fire. Walls of mahogany shelves stretched up into the shadows, holding centuries of knowledge that seemed to judge the two figures entering the room. William closed the heavy oak doors behind them. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He didn't lock it. That would be too scandalous even for him, but the sound signaled a shift in their reality. They were no longer Duke and outcast. They were conspirators. Evelyn walked to the fireplace, shivering. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the dinner confrontation was fading, replaced by the bone-deep chill of the drafty corridors and the gnawing hunger she had tried to ignore. "Here," William said. Evelyn turned. He had bypassed the bookshelves and gone straight to a side table, where a crystal decanter and a plate of untouched hors d'oeuvres sat. He held out the plate, slices of venison on toast points. "It isn't roast beef," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "But it will help." Evelyn looked at the food, her pride warring with her survival instinct. Survival won. She took a piece, eating it quickly, forgetting the elegance required of a lady. "Slowly," William warned, pouring a glass of amber liquid, "or you'll make yourself ill. Drink this. It's brandy. It will warm you." She took the glass, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She took a sip, coughing as the fire burned down her throat. "Why did you bring me here, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice rasping. The book was a lie. "The book was a pretext," William corrected. He walked over to a massive desk near the window, which overlooked the snowy expanse of the estate. "My mother didn't just find discrepancies in the archives, Evelyn. She found a name." Evelyn froze. A name? The clerk who processed the transfer of funds 3 years ago. The man whose testimony damned your father. Silas Vane, Evelyn said bitterly. I remember him. He testified that he saw my father move the gold. Silas Vane is a ghost, William said, turning to face her. The firelight cast long shadows across his sharp features, making him look dangerous. He doesn't exist. We tried to find him after the trial to question him further, but he had vanished. No birth record, no death record. But my mother found a diary entry from my father, dated 2 days before the scandal broke. William picked up a leather-bound journal from the desk and opened it. My father wrote, Harrington is pressing for the railway deal to close early. He is using a broker named Barnaby Finch. I do not trust the man. Barnaby Finch, Evelyn repeated, the name unfamiliar. Barnaby Finch was a real clerk, William explained, a man with a gambling debt of £4,000. My mother hired a private investigator last week. It turns out Barnaby Finch left England the day after your father was arrested. He moved to Boston. So he ran away with the money? No, William said darkly. He ran away with his life. But he left something behind. William reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a stack of yellowed papers. My father had copies of the transfer requests. He never destroyed them, despite Harrington's insistence that he do so for security. Look at this. He laid a document on the desk. Evelyn stepped forward, setting her glass down. She leaned over the paper, the light of the desk lamp illuminating the ink. It was a transfer authorization for £50,000. At the bottom was her father's signature. Arthur Moore. It looks real, she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. That's his hand. Look closer, William commanded. He pulled a magnifying glass from the drawer and held it over the signature. Look at the pressure points of the ink. See how it pools at the curves. A man signing his own name writes fluidly. This was drawn, it was traced. Evelyn gasped. Through the glass, the hesitation marks were visible, tiny tremors in the ink where the forger had paused. My father didn't sign this, she breathed. No, he didn't. William tossed the magnifying glass onto the desk. Harrington needed a scapegoat. Your father was the perfect target, honest, trusting, and without the political connections to fight back. Harrington forged the signature, stole the money to cover his own debts, likely from his failed shipping ventures in the East Indies, and paid Barnaby Finch to testify under the false name of Silas Vane. The weight of the truth crashed down on Evelyn. It wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a calculated murder of her family's life. He killed him, Evelyn whispered, her hands clenching into fists. My father died of the shame. The stress stopped his heart. Harrington murdered him just as surely as if he had used a knife. Yes, William said. He did. And now he sits at your table, Evelyn said, her voice rising, cracking with emotion. He eats your food, he laughs, and you are going to marry his daughter. William moved so fast she didn't see him coming. In a heartbeat, he was in front of her, gripping her shoulders. I would sooner marry a viper, he growled. I never intended to marry Genevieve. That was a rumor started by Harrington to pressure me. I have been looking for a way to destroy him for months. I didn't realize the key to his destruction was standing in the cold, wearing a blue dress. He looked down at her, his gaze intense, searching. I am sorry, Evelyn. I am sorry I didn't look closer 3 years ago. I was young, and I was grieving my own father. I let you fall. We fell very far, she whispered. I will catch you now, he vowed. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The anger and revelation gave way to something else. The distance between them seemed to vanish. William's hands were still on her shoulders, his thumbs brushing the bare skin above her collarbone. Evelyn looked up at him. He was the Duke of Ashbury, a man who owned half the county, and she was a pauper. But in this dim light, with the truth lying on the desk between them, they were just a man and a woman, bound by a shared enemy. William lowered his head slowly. His eyes dropped to her lips. Evelyn's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. She wanted this. Wanted to feel desired. Wanted to feel safe, if only for a second. Bam! A heavy thud against the library window made them both jump apart. William spun around, reaching for the fireplace poker. "Who is there?" There was no answer, only the howling of the wind. William went to the window and pressed his face against the glass. It was pitch black outside, the snow swirling in a white vortex. "It was likely a branch," Evelyn said, clutching her chest. "There are no trees close enough to this window," William said grimly. He turned back to her, his face hard. "Someone was watching. Harrington knows we are in here. He knows the walls represent a threat." "Thomas!" Evelyn gasped, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "If Harrington suspects you have evidence, if he thinks I know, he will try to silence the loose ends," William finished. "My brother is at the cottage alone," Evelyn cried, gathering her skirts. "He is bedridden. He cannot defend himself." "You are not going there alone," William said, grabbing his heavy wool coat from the rack by the door. "I have to. It's 3 miles through the woods." "I said you are not going alone," William commanded, throwing the coat over his shoulders. He didn't ring for a servant. He didn't call for a footman. "My carriage is prepared in the stables. We leave now." "But the ball! Your mother!" "To hell with the ball," William said, opening the library door and checking the hallway. "Let them gossip. Tonight, we hunt." The drive to the Moore cottage was a nightmare in motion. The Cavendish carriage, usually a vessel of smooth luxury, rocked and shuddered as the horses fought against the deepening drifts. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, blinding the driver and turning the world into a claustrophobic tunnel of white. Inside the carriage, the air was tense and cold. William had thrown a fur-lined rug over Evelyn, tucking it around her with a tenderness that belied the fury in his eyes. "Faster!" William shouted up to the driver, pounding on the roof. "We can't, Your Grace!" The driver yelled back, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The wheels are slipping." Evelyn sat on the edge of the velvet seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "If they hurt him—" "They won't," William said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. He reached across the carriage and took her hand. "Harrington is a coward. He uses paper and ink to destroy people. He won't risk violence unless he is desperate." "He looked desperate at dinner," Evelyn countered. "When your mother mentioned the ledgers, I saw his eyes. He looked like a trapped rat." William squeezed her hand. "Tell me about Thomas. How sick is he?" "It's his lungs," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "Dr. Ephraim Cole saw him last month. He said it is advanced. He needs warmth, good food, and medicine we cannot afford. I sold my mother's locket last week to buy a bottle of laudanum for his cough." William's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you ask for help?" "And say what?" Evelyn snapped, her pride flaring even in her fear. "Hello, Your Grace. Do you remember the daughter of the thief? Can we have some money?" "We have been shunned, William. The gatekeepers at your estate wouldn't have even let me walk up the driveway." William looked away, shame coloring his features. "You are right. I allowed the walls to be built too high." The carriage lurched violently to the left. The horses whinnied in panic. "Whoa!" the driver screamed. With a grinding crunch of wood, the carriage came to a halt, tilting dangerously. "What happened?" Evelyn cried. William kicked the door open and jumped out into the snow. It was knee-deep. He trudged to the front. "A fallen tree," he called back, his voice grim. "It's blocking the road. The horses can't pass." "We have to walk," Evelyn said, scrambling out of the carriage before he could stop her. The wind hit her like a physical slap, stealing her breath. Her ballroom slippers were instantly soaked. "It's a mile still," William said, looking at her thin dress. "You will freeze." "I don't care," she said, starting to trudge through the snow. "I'm not leaving Thomas." William didn't argue. He unclasped his heavy wool cloak and wrapped it around her, engulfing her small frame. He was left in his tailcoat, the biting cold instantly attacking him, but he didn't flinch. He took her arm, supporting her weight. "Lean on me," he commanded. "Keep moving." The walk was grueling. The forest, once their childhood playground, was now a menacing labyrinth of shadows and ice. Every snapping twig sounded like a footstep. Every shadow looked like a man waiting to strike. Evelyn's feet went numb. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. But the thought of Thomas, sweet, artistic Thomas who used to draw birds for her, kept her putting one foot in front of the other. Finally, the trees broke. The small stone cottage sat in a clearing. It was dark. Too dark. Usually, Evelyn left a candle burning in the window for when she returned. Tonight, the windows were black voids. "Stay here," William whispered, pushing her behind him. He reached into his boot and pulled out a small, pearl-handled pistol. "You brought a gun to a ball?" Evelyn whispered, wide-eyed. "I told you," he murmured. "I expected a different kind of trouble tonight." He approached the door. It was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. The wood around the lock was splintered. "No!" Evelyn screamed, shoving past him. "Evelyn, wait!" She burst into the cottage. The inside was a scene of devastation. The meager furniture they had left, a table, 2 chairs, a cupboard, was overturned and smashed. The mattress had been dragged from the bed and sliced open, feathers scattered across the floor like snow. The few books they owned were torn apart, their pages littering the room. They were looking for something. They were looking for the evidence. "Thomas!" Evelyn screamed, frantically searching the wreckage. "Thomas!" There was no answer. William entered behind her, his gun raised, scanning the corners. "Check the back room." Evelyn ran to the small alcove where Thomas slept. His bed was empty. The sheets were cold. She spun around, panic seizing her throat. "He's gone! They took him! Oh God, William, they took him!" "Wait," William said, holstering the gun and kneeling by the fireplace. "Look." Evelyn rushed over. On the hearth, hidden partially by the overturned coal scuttle, was a smear of blood. It was fresh, bright red against the grey stone. Next to the blood was a piece of paper, pinned to the floor by a heavy iron poker. Evelyn fell to her knees, her hands shaking so hard she could barely grasp the paper. She pulled it free. It was a note, scrawled in hasty, jagged handwriting. The ledgers for the boy, midnight, the old mill. Come alone, or the winter takes him. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Evelyn stared at the paper, the world spinning. The old mill. That's on the Harrington estate. "Yes," William said, his voice deadly calm. He reached down and touched the blood on the hearth. "It's not much blood, Evelyn. He was likely struck, perhaps dragged. But he is alive. If they wanted him dead, they would have left him here." "They want the ledgers," Evelyn said, looking up at William. "The ledgers you have in your library." "They know." Harrington must have seen my mother speaking to me. He realized the game was up. William said. He stood up, towering in the small, ruined room. The cold aristocrat from the ballroom was gone. In his place was a man burning with a quiet, terrifying intensity. "What do we do?" Evelyn asked, tears streaming down her freezing face. "I don't have the ledgers. You do. And it's nearly midnight now." William looked at his pocket watch. "We have 40 minutes. He looked at Evelyn. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also the resolve. She wasn't breaking. She was ready to do whatever was necessary. "We are going to the mill," William said. "He said to come alone," Evelyn argued. "If he sees you—" "He won't see me until it is too late," William vowed. "Harrington made a mistake tonight, Evelyn." "What mistake?" William walked to the door, looking out into the storm. He thought he was kidnapping the brother of a beggar. He forgot that the beggar is under the protection of the House of Cavendish. He turned back to her, his hand extended. "Do you trust me?" Evelyn looked at the hand that had held hers in the waltz, the hand that had offered her food, the hand that now offered her a chance at revenge and salvation. "Yes," she said, taking it. "Then let us go," William said, "and let us show Lord Harrington what happens when you wake the wolf." The old mill stood like a rotting skeleton against the night sky, its massive wooden wheel frozen in the iced-over river. The wind here was ferocious, whistling through the gaps in the timber walls, creating a sound like dying breaths. William stopped the horses a quarter-mile away, tethering them in a thicket of pine to hide their steam. The rest of the journey had to be made on foot, in silence. "Listen to me closely," William whispered, pulling Evelyn behind the trunk of a massive oak tree. He reached into his coat and produced a heavy, leather-bound book. Evelyn frowned. "Is that—" "It is a volume of poetry," William said grimly. "Harrington has never seen the real ledgers. In the dark, this will pass." He handed her the book. It felt heavy, a burden of deceit in her hands. "You must walk in through the main doors," William instructed, his voice tight with suppressed fear for her. "Keep his attention on you. Keep him talking. I will circle around to the grain chute on the upper level. I played there as a boy. I know the way in." "And if he checks the book?" Evelyn asked, her teeth chattering. "Do not let him check it until Thomas is standing next to you," William said. He reached out, cupping her freezing face in his warm hands. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known, Evelyn. Do not falter." He leaned in, pressing a brief, fierce kiss to her forehead, a seal of protection, and then he melted into the shadows. Evelyn stood alone. She took a deep breath of the biting air, straightened her spine, and walked toward the light flickering through the cracks of the mill doors. She pushed the doors open. The interior was cavernous and smelled of mouldy grain and rat droppings. A single lantern sat on a crate in the center of the room, casting long, dancing shadows. "I am here," Evelyn called out, her voice echoing in the rafters. "I came alone." "Close the door," a voice sneered from the darkness. "It's freezing." Lord Harrington stepped into the ring of light. He was still wearing his dinner jacket, but his tie was undone, and his eyes were wild, rimmed with red. He held a heavy revolver in his hand, the metal gleaming dully. Behind him, tied to a wooden support beam, slumped Thomas. "Thomas!" Evelyn cried, taking a step forward. "Ah! Ah!" Harrington warned, raising the gun. "Stay where you are, Miss Moore. The book." Thomas stirred. His face was bruised, a cut bleeding sluggishly on his cheek. He looked up, his eyes hazy. "Evie, run!" he croaked, coughing violently. "I have it," Evelyn said, lifting the volume of poetry. She held it tight against her chest. "Let him go, and I will give it to you." Harrington laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You think you are in a position to bargain? I could shoot you both and take it from your cold hands." "If you shoot me," Evelyn said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I will drop this book into the mill race below. The ice is thin there. The current will take it under the wheel. You will never see it again." She stepped back toward the gaping hole in the floor where the gears turned, hovering over the black water below. It was a bluff, a dangerous one. Harrington hesitated. He licked his lips. "You have your father's stubbornness. It killed him, you know." "You killed him," Evelyn spat. "You stole from the crown and framed a man who considered you a friend. Friendship is a luxury for the wealthy," Harrington roared, his composure cracking. "I was ruining. The East India investments collapsed. I had creditors threatening to take my estate, my title. I needed £50,000 to survive the month. Arthur was convenient." "And Barnaby Finch?" Evelyn asked, stalling. She needed to buy William time. "The man you paid to lie?" Harrington sneered. "Finch was a loose end. I paid his passage to America, hoping the ship would sink. Sadly, he survived. But it doesn't matter. Once I burn that ledger, there is no proof. The Dowager is a senile old bat. No judge will take her word without documents." "The Dowager," a deep voice boomed from the shadows above, "is sharper than you will ever be, Harrington." Harrington spun around, aiming the gun toward the rafters. "Who is that? Show yourself." William jumped. He didn't take the stairs. He vaulted from the grain platform, landing on a pile of old sacks 10 feet below. He rolled and sprang to his feet, a dark, avenging angel in a torn tailcoat. "The Duke!" Harrington gasped, the gun shaking in his hand. You were supposed to be at the ball." "And you were supposed to be a gentleman," William snarled, advancing on him. Harrington panicked. He swung the gun back toward Evelyn. "Stay back! I'll kill her, I swear it!" "Do it!" William challenged, stepping closer, his eyes locked on Harrington's. "Pull the trigger, Harrington, but know this. If she falls, you will not leave this mill alive. I will tear you apart with my bare hands." The sheer force of William's rage was a physical thing. It filled the room, terrifying in its intensity. Harrington wavered. He looked at Evelyn, then at William. He was a man who fought with pens and lawyers, not violence. In that split second of hesitation, Thomas moved. Despite his illness, despite his bindings, Thomas More kicked out with his heavy boots. He struck the lantern sitting on the crate. The lantern shattered. The oil spilled across the dry, rotted floorboards, instantly igniting. A wall of fire roared up between Harrington and Evelyn. "No!" Harrington screamed, shielding his face from the heat. William lunged through the flames. He tackled Harrington, slamming him against the wall. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding toward the waterhole. Harrington clawed at William's face, screaming in desperation. But he was no match for the younger, stronger man, fueled by years of repressed anger. William struck him once, a solid blow to the jaw that snapped Harrington's head back. Harrington slumped to the floor, unconscious. "Evelyn!" William shouted, coughing in the thick black smoke that was rapidly filling the mill. "Get Thomas!" Evelyn was already at the beam. The fire was spreading fast, eating the dry timber like kindling. She struggled with the knots, her fingers numb and clumsy. "I can't! The rope is too tight!" she screamed, choking on the smoke. William was there in an instant. He produced a small penknife from his pocket and slashed the ropes. Thomas fell forward into William's arms. "Can you walk, lad?" William shouted over the roar of the fire. "I think so," Thomas wheezed. "Go. Out the door," William ordered, shoving them toward the exit. "What about Harrington?" Evelyn cried, looking back at the slumped figure near the spreading flames. William hesitated. He looked at the man who had destroyed the Moore family. It would be so easy to leave him. It would be justice. But William Cavendish was not a murderer. "Go!" he yelled at Evelyn. He ran back into the fire. He grabbed Harrington by the collar of his coat and dragged the heavy man across the floor. The heat was searing, singing the hair on William's arms. A burning beam crashed down inches from his path. William heaved Harrington out into the snow just as the roof of the mill collapsed inward with a sound like thunder, sending a geyser of sparks into the night sky. They lay in the snow, gasping for air. The Duke, the outcast, the sick boy, and the villain. Evelyn crawled over to William, checking him frantically. His face was soot-stained, his fine clothes ruined, but he was alive. "You saved him," she whispered, looking at the unconscious Harrington. William wiped ash from his brow. "I want him to rot in a cell, Evelyn. Death is too easy an escape for what he did to you." In the distance, the sound of bells ringing from the village church drifted through the cold air. It was midnight. Christmas Day had begun. 1 month later, the Ashbury Gazette's headline was bold and uncompromising. "Duke exposes fraud. Lord Harrington arrested for embezzlement and kidnapping." The scandal had shaken the county to its core. The trial had been swift, fueled by the evidence found in the ledgers and the testimony of the Duke himself. Lord Harrington was currently residing in the Tower of London, awaiting sentencing. Lady Genevieve had fled to an aunt in Cornwall, her reputation in tatters. But for Evelyn Moore, the headlines mattered less than the warmth of the fire in the drawing-room of Ashbury Hall. She sat in a velvet armchair, a book in her lap. Opposite her, Thomas was resting on a chaise lounge. His colour was better, pink in his cheeks, the dark circles fading. The best doctors from London had been summoned, paid for by the Ashbury estate. With proper heat, nutrition, and medicine, his consumption had turned out to be severe bronchitis exacerbated by malnutrition. He was healing. The door opened and Lady Margaret entered, leaning on her cane but looking more vibrant than she had in years. "The solicitor has just left," Margaret announced, sitting down and pouring tea. "The Crown has agreed to release the frozen assets of the Moore estate, plus interest. You are a wealthy woman, Evelyn." Evelyn smiled, though it felt strange. "I do not care about the wealth, Your Grace. I only care that my father's name is clean." "It is spotless," Margaret assured her. "I made sure the bishop mentioned Arthur's innocence in his sermon yesterday. Anyone who says otherwise will answer to me." The double doors to the drawing-room opened again. William entered. He had been in London for weeks dealing with the legal fallout. Evelyn hadn't seen him since the night at the mill. He looked tired, but the weight that had always seemed to hang on his shoulders was gone. He was dressed informally, in a tweed jacket, wind-blown from the ride. He stopped when he saw her. "Mother," William said, bowing his head slightly. "Thomas." "William," Margaret said, standing up. "Thomas and I were just inspecting the greenhouse. Weren't we, Thomas?" Thomas grinned, grabbing his crutch. "Yes, I have a sudden, overwhelming interest in orchids." They left the room with not so subtle haste, leaving Evelyn and William alone. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire. "You left without saying goodbye," Evelyn said softly, standing up. "I had to ensure the job was finished," William said, walking toward her. "I couldn't rest until the ink was dry on Harrington's confession." He stopped a foot away from her. He looked at her, not as the beggar girl in the blue dress, but as the woman who had walked into a burning mill for her brother. "I brought you something," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. Evelyn's breath hitched. "William, it is not a ring," he said quickly, a rare, nervous smile touching his lips. He opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver locket. "I found the pawnbroker you sold your mother's locket to," William said softly. "I bought it back." Tears sprang to Evelyn's eyes. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the cold metal. You did this?" "I would do anything for you," William said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I spent years watching the world from a distance, Evelyn, thinking that duty meant solitude. That night at the ball, when I took your hand, I felt like I woke up." He took the locket and fastened it around her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin. "They are calling you the Duchess of the People in the village," he murmured. "Because you saved your brother. Because you stood up to Harrington." "I am no duchess," Evelyn whispered. "Not yet," William said. He took a step back and extended his hand, palm up. The gesture mirrored the moment at the ball, but this time there was no crowd, no music, no pretense. "The floor is ours, Miss Moore," William said, his grey eyes shining with a love that melted the last of the winter chill. "Will you do me the honor? Not because my mother commands it, but because I am asking." Evelyn looked at his hand. She looked at the man who had walked into fire for her. She placed her hand in his. "I will," she said. William pulled her close, his arm going around her waist. He didn't need an orchestra. He began to hum, a low, deep sound against her chest, the melody of the blue Danube. They turned slowly in the firelight, the Duke and the banker's daughter, dancing the first steps of a life that would become a legend in Ashbury. The snow fell softly outside, covering the scars of the past, leaving the world bright, clean, and new. And so, the cold winter of Ashbury Hall gave way to a spring of justice and love. Evelyn Moore didn't just reclaim her family's honor. She captured the heart of a duke who had forgotten how to feel. It reminds us that sometimes the strongest hands are the ones that have been forced to carry the heaviest burdens, and that true nobility isn't found in a title, but in the courage to stand tall when the world wants you to kneel. What did you think of Evelyn's bravery? Would you have walked into that mill? Let me know in the comments below. If this story warmed your heart, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another tale of romance, drama, and karma. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.